bases dropped on a new edition of Soccer Down here. It's April 30th. It is a tactical Thursday. John thought it was Tuesday. That's where we're at in the stage of quarantine. Days, times, it all doesn't mean anything. You know, that's where we are. We'll be talking tactics today. So if you have questions, you have people you want to talk about their tactics, you want to talk about the best managers when it comes to tactics, your favorite soccer tactics, questions about tactics, that's what we do when we open the floor this way. And Joe Johnstone called for a tactical Thursday, and when Joe makes a request, he gets it. And he's got a question that'll kick us off when we get there. We've also got some news and updates from around the world. The mayor of Liverpool is saying things, and we need to talk about them. You have other people saying other things that definitely need to be talked about. Some coming from France, others coming from other parts of the world. Lots of stuff today, John.
And we will, sooner or later, also have our SPFL update. Yes, there's an SPFL update. But first thing I wanted to talk about was something that appeared on the timeline and has appeared on the @SoccerDownHere timeline on the Twitters, and it is a great idea for a fantastic cause.
Yeah, Die Hard Custom, who does our scarves and a lot of other things for us, they came up with the type of... It's not necessarily just a mask right now. A lot of people are using them as masks. It's the kind of mask that, honestly, I prefer. They call it the Guard. You can see them used in a number of different ways. You can wear it on the top of your head. You can wear it as a mask over your mouth and nose. You can wear it just over your mouth. You can wear it as a headband. Like it's a flexible thing. It's a sleeve, essentially, and I picked up a couple of them from a different manufacturer right before it became a recommendation. And look, I don't think it's going to stop being a recommendation anytime soon. I think that we have gotten to the point that, well, at least most of us have, where we've made the decision that it's for not just our safety, more than anything, it's for everybody else's safety around us. And we see some countries in the world that use these far more frequently than us when it's flu season or what have you. I do think it's going to become far more common in the U.S. So when Die Hard put this out, I started thinking about, one, I'd like to get some more masks because these are ones that you can easily wash, but it's nice to have a couple of extras. And two, what we can do for an organization like Soccer in the Streets who has families, has kids who might not have an easy way to get a mask. And again, it's going to be, I think, a very important tool in all of this, whether it's over the next month or two, whether it's over the next year, just in general, because this is going to become, whenever you have diseases and viruses that are this contagious, you have to take precautions to not spread them. I don't think we really understood that because we hadn't had anything like this in over a century in the United States, hidden this kind of way. So, masks are going to become a thing. And as we know, you do have certain populations. My time with Soccer in the Streets taught me a lot about some very basic things that, we might not think about on a day-to-day that are just not available to everybody. And being able to track these down is not an easy thing if you don't know what you're looking for. So I thought of doing a Soccer Down Here guard that you can use as a mask, but also for every one that you guys buy, we're going to donate one to Soccer in the Streets, to the kids and families over there, and they're going to distribute them to those who need them. So it's a good partnership, and we couldn't do it without Die Hard giving us a really good price point on being able to make that worthwhile and make it reasonable. So we are doing the guards for $20. That includes shipping it to you. You will get your guard, and we're in the pre-sale phase right now. And then when we get them in, we will send yours out, and we will collect the rest and drop them off for Soccer in the Streets so they can get them to their kids and families. So It's $20 flat. That includes your shipping, so you can send us a message. We'll get you taken care of. A lot of people have already jumped on it, and thank you so much for that. That'll allow us to get these ordered a little bit quicker. So spread the word. It's $20. You'll get a guard that you can wear as a mask, and you'll get one to a kid or a family at Soccer in the Streets who needs it. So thanks for supporting us. Everybody who's jumped on board so quick, thanks for supporting us.
Yeah, we've seen the DMs come across the board, and it's a fantastic idea when I saw it come across, and I wanted to lead with the show with that this morning for a double preposition in a complex sentence.
Yeah, I like this kind of mask better. It's just more comfortable for me. One, I also, when I started thinking about it, like getting a mask for myself, I didn't want anything that looked like it could be used in a medical facility. I didn't want to get anything like that because I'd rather have those where they need to be. And it's not that anybody's doing anything wrong by having them. It's just, for me, it was perception. And I was like, you know what? I want to get something else. These are a little more comfortable to me. And they do have multiple, purposes. You can use them for different things, but also they're easily just to, wash. And they keep very well. So I've got two that I've really, had good success with, and we know from Die Hard the stuff that they have done for us has always been of the highest quality. So, when this became something that they put out and spread the word about, I was like, this is a definite for us.
Yep. So once again, hit us up either publicly on the Twitters or DM, and Jason will hit you back as quickly as possible to make sure that you're in the queue to help out us and to help out Soccer in the Streets and to help you out as well. So it's a great idea, and I wanted to lead off with that this morning.
Yeah, it's pre-sale right now, so the quicker we can get to a size of an order that makes sense, we're going to get this order in and get these shipped. The turnaround from our friends at Die Hard on our scarves, on our beanies, on pretty much anything they've done for us has been incredibly fast.
Mm-hmm.
So we will be working towards that and get your pre-orders in now.
All right. Going back to yesterday before we get into the overnight and into today, we were getting into the words that, when I read them on the show and I'm reading quotes and I put emphasis on, or there's a word that has a different connotation when you're thinking about things in England versus the United States. Chris Hutchison came up with a couple more that we probably should add to the list.
Okay.
Spunk and spunky.
It can, yeah.
And then knock you up.
Okay. I might need a little explanation on other ways that can be used. I mean, I've heard it used in ways not like the movie Knocked Up, which I think is kind of clear, the connotation there. I
thought it was, when I had heard about knock you up other than knocked up, I thought it was along the same lines of ring you up, to make, to have some kind of communication.
Okay.
Unless you're beating the crap out of somebody, maybe that's what that means. I don't know.
I'm doing a search, and it basically says British connotation is knock at someone's door, so it's very literal.
Okay, so it's just knocking on the. All right, so there you go. Okay,
all right. That one I did not know.
No, so adding that to the queue, and Joey Logan.
Sorry, John.
Yeah. Yes. Joey Logan, who listened to the show yesterday on not live but on replay, in answer to the question that was posed yesterday, said there is no best loss.
That's a little harsh. I mean, because what that does, and this is a mentality. You have to. I'm not picking on you, Joey, but if every loss is the worst thing in the world, that's a problem. There are losses that are better than others. I mean, you have to be able to judge a performance as well as an outcome, because they can be separate. They can go in different directions. I mean, there are wins that are better than others. There are wins where the performance is better than another one. There are losses that a performance is better than another one. It is a fact. But the alternative is that every loss is the worst thing or the end of the world or they're all bad. And we know that's not necessarily true either. And it's not a good way to function, because then you can overreact to a loss in a lot of ways. Sometimes you do have to just tip your cap. Sometimes you do have to understand that you had some bad luck. Sometimes there were extenuating circumstances like fatigue, like, a call that could have went against you, a bad reaction to a call, et cetera, et cetera. Sometimes you just get beat by a better team. And that's a fact, too. I mean, the LAFC game last year, for example, it was a small period of time where LAFC was the better team, but they made the absolute most of it. There were some questionable decisions in that. There were a couple offside calls that I would have loved to have had a better angle, but I didn't feel like coming out of it, it was a game where Atlanta United was screwed. I didn't feel like it was a game where Atlanta United wasn't treated fairly. I think it was a game where, in the key moments, LAFC was better. And that happens too. And that's okay. It's not what you want to have on a regular basis, especially with a club with these expectations. But yeah, some losses are better than others. I think you have to accept that, or you can drive yourself crazy. And we don't want you to drive yourself crazy.
No. So, question is, how would you like to tackle this morning? Would you like to tackle tactically, on a Tactics Thursday first, or do you want to do news first and have tactics go to hour 2?
Let's do news first, and then we'll get into tactics as we go.
Okay, because then that will also give folks the opportunity to send in their tactical thoughts and questions on a tactical Thursday, which is 2 days away from Tuesday. So,
yes, all is true.
Yes, so send in your stuff to us. Send in your tactics, your tactical questions at Soccer Down Here. We will tackle your tactics on a tactical Thursday.
For we are the BBC News Service. Oh, not now.
Now. Let's
now.
Go.
All right. Jonathan Johnson from ESPN and ESPN FC. News out of Ligue 1. PSG will be declared Ligue 1 champs after the Professional Football League in France confirmed that the Ligue 1 and Ligue 2 seasons have ended. Sources have told ESPN. You'll remember earlier in the week that French Prime Minister Edouard Philippe said football will return before September, which made it impossible for French professional football to finish the domestic campaigns. And so the LFP have decided to leave the tables as they stand after the last match was played and will confirm PSG as champs for the third consecutive year.
Okay.
Marseille have also qualified for the group stage of Champions League. Rennes goes into the qualification rounds. Lille and Reims will go directly into Europa League group stage. Nice will have to go through qualification.
No Lyon. Lyon, no European football for the first time since 1997.
In terms of relegation, Toulouse were adrift at what?
Wait a minute. So they are going to do relegation.
Yeah.
So now we already have our first major difference. The Dutch said we're not going to do relegation. We're not going to do promotion. The French, yeah, we're going to do it. Now, the relegation side of things in the top flight anyway, fairly cut and dried. Although, I mean, you do have games that are not getting played and things could have changed, but at least the team on the bottom of the table was pretty widely on the bottom end of the table, correct?
Toulouse were adrift at the bottom, from Jonathan's article.
By how much?
Let's check on that.
Dios mío.
I'm reading.
Well, all right, hold on. Liga, let's get the table as it was completed, because they are saying it is now completed. Toulouse had 13 points out of 28 matches. That's horrendous.
Oof.
3 wins, 21 losses, 4 draws, 14 points adrift. They had 10 games left. So, not impossible, but very improbable.
Yes.
Amiens, 4 points adrift. That's a different conversation. And
they will be joining Toulouse.
Well, yeah, because they're just doing promotion relegation. And that's not... This is why we've talked about it from day one, about how difficult this is. And this is why we have wondered what would happen in these situations. Now, in this case, the government came in and said, hey, you're not playing. Stop it. So they didn't have a choice, unless they wanted to finish the season in September, which, with other leagues trying to finish sooner, probably wouldn't have happened. Okay. But you've got this situation where a team is 4 points back. They had 10 games left. They're not going to get to play those 10 games. You're going to be comparing schedules. You're going to be comparing what teams had left. And they're going down. And they're going to take a financial hit for that. And I don't know their current situation from a financial perspective. But because you didn't play the last 10 games, you're going to put a club into the second division. It doesn't feel right. That's why I think most people expected the leagues to do one of two things. The null and void idea, which I hate, but nothing happened. Basically, the season games were played. We're using those games to determine European qualification, but that's all. You're not having promotion. You're not having relegation. You're not having a champion. Or you have a champion, you have promotion, but you don't relegate anybody, and you have to have a larger league on a temporary basis. Francis went with the other option. Just the season's over, and the rules are what they would have been to begin with. And now you're going to have teams get relegated who 4 points in 10 matches. I mean, we see that type of stuff happen all the time. So it's not a good look. I mean, even you go up to 16th and 17th place. Dijon and Saint-Étienne are on 30, and Amiens is on 23. So, a 7-point difference to get to 16th. Holy. We're going to hear about this.
Yep.
Like, just don't worry. We're going to hear about this.
Lorient and Lens will be returning to the top tier based on their Ligue 2 positions when play was halted. As the third tier, and this is from the Johnson article, is under French Football Federation jurisdiction, they will decide the fate of promoted teams in that competition with the LFP, as two must come down. And you have one team adrift at the bottom, but then 18th and 19th place both have the same number of points. So that'll be the next question for the LFP and the French Federation when it comes to Pro-Rel further down the table.
Now, we already got things we're going to hear about this. So Toulouse, who's at the bottom and in a bad way, via letter to the league and the French Football Federation, translated, any decision to relegate TFC based on provisional standings would be unjust, unequal, and legally unfounded. That is from Jonathan Johnson of ESPN. That was tweeted out less than an hour ago. It looks like the club might have tweeted that out as well about an hour ago. So, oh boy. Here we go. I mean, that's the reality in this. This is where we're going to be. Now you're going to get some countries that go to the next step, and it's going to be the courtroom. Or at least the arbitration room, because there's valid questions. I mean, Toulouse, on paper, yes, there's a valid question. In the real world, no, they weren't going to save themselves. Amiens, different conversation. And if they're going to let Toulouse step up and be the bad guys up front, fine. They'll be right there with them, because they have a very valid question about being 4 points adrift with 10 to play and why they're getting relegated. Because we've seen it in leagues around the world. Teams get relegated, and that can really catastrophically change their future. And don't know if that'll be the case here. Don't know what kind of financial losses you're looking at if that happens, but they are going to get relegated. They did not get to finish the season that started. I would assume the competition guidelines would probably be in big question here about finishing the competition that is going to see them relegated. France is going to be the test case for leagues that consider this, because we have not seen one make this type of announcement yet. Argentina went away from relegation. They had 10 games left to play in their Copa de la Superliga. Their relegation was done over a 3-year period, an aggregate points per game over 3 years. And they said, you know what, we're not going to relegate anybody. The Dutch, they're not relegating anybody. They're not promoting anybody either, but they're not relegating anybody. France said, well, we're just gonna do it and see what happens. We'll see what happens. It's going to get ugly.
Katie Weaver says that's huge for Stade Rennes, tough for Lille, who's only 1 point back from Champions League. Assuming Champions League happens as planned next season, that's a big dollar difference.
Yeah, I mean, Lille 1 point back. Lyon, Montpellier, Monaco, all 1 point back from getting into the Europa League. Angers is 2 points back from getting into the Europa League. Strasbourg, 3 points back from getting into the Europa League. Bordeaux and Nantes all the way down to 13th place, 4 points back to get into the Europa League. That's another big financial situation. You know, you've got 20 teams in Ligue 1.
Mm-hmm.
You've got Lille with a very valid complaint. Even Rennes and Nice, you've got a complaint because they're 9 points back with 10 games left of getting into the Champions League. But then you've got the 7th through 13th with valid complaints about getting into the Europa League, because 5th place and 13th place are separated by 4 points. Then, on the bottom end of the table, you've got the valid questions about relegation. So, over half of the league have valid questions about this determination. This is going to get ugly.
Going over to England, and this is appearing in both the Mirror and the Daily Mail. Ian Ladyman, one of the best writing names that is out there currently for
that is a great name.
The Daily Mail. Players below the Skybet Championship have been told that the chances of the current season ever being finished are fading, with Premier League chief execs due to meet to discuss Project Restart tomorrow. The EFL is grappling with the problem, how to best find a way through the problems caused by the coronavirus epidemic. With most championship clubs still committed, finding a way to finish the season, resolve is understood to be weakening further down the pyramid.
It's not a surprise. You say that like it's a surprise, but it's not a surprise.
No.
Because you're not having TV money drive the conversation. You know, these teams potentially losing money by playing games behind closed doors. They don't have the money to lose. You know, the Premier League wants to play games because they have TV money coming in that they want, and they want to keep it. Championship, difficult balancing act, but there is TV money there. League 1, League 2, I mean, why? You know, okay, so League 1, you're looking at the table right now. Top 2 go up to the championship. Then there's a playoff for the third team that goes up. On the bottom end, 4 go down, and or is it 3 who go up or is it 4 who go up? There's a playoff, so maybe 4 go up. I think it's 4 from League 1 to Championship, because 4 go down, and we know Bury has been expelled, so they're obviously going down. Bolton is way adrift. Southend United, pretty far adrift. Tranmere is 3 points out of safety, 4 points out of 19th, 5 points out of 18th. So Tranmere Rovers, not happy about this. Sunderland, Wycombe Wanderers, Peterborough United are all on 59 points. And they've all played a different number of games.
Yes.
Which also factors into it because, we need some more excitement. Coventry's in a great position up at the top. Rotherham United is 2 points ahead of Oxford, Portsmouth, and Fleetwood Town. Right now, that would mean Rotherham United would be in the automatic promotion spot. The others are in the playoffs. But then you've got Wycombe Wanderers, who are on 59 points and have played one less game than Peterborough United and 2 less games than Sunderland. If you're going to go points per game, they're in the playoff spot. If you have promotion and relegation, which is another question.
Mm-hmm.
So, and then if you decide not to, if you say we're not going to do that, well, first off, get ready for the court cases. And second, then what do you do about a club like Bury who is expelled? So You've got to have somebody get promoted from League Two.
Yep.
You would think. So how do you deal with that? Because everybody's going to say, well, it could have been me. It could have been me. We want in.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Have fun, Football League. Have fun.
Yep. EFL board meeting on Wednesday. PFA reps, along with club captains, have been told to pass on to their teammates there's a very real possibility of no more football taking place this season. Supporters could be banned from EFL stadia until as late as next January, and this is from the Mirror. Despite plans to resume training in May, clubs don't believe there's a realistic chance of games happening anytime in June.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's feasible. Because you're in a different financial conversation with teams further down the pyramid. So is it financially viable for them to finish? Maybe not. It's competitively they want to do it because of what it means, because you avoid these questions. But, depending on the finances, they might not be able to. And that has changed over time. I thought if this was a shorter stoppage, you just get back and finish the season, even if it's later than you planned on. But now you're getting so much further along that it's going to be harder for these smaller teams to do it. Can they find a way to play it out? I don't know. I don't know the feasibility of it. It would obviously make the most sense from a competitive standpoint. There's no question about that. Even though people would still question things about it because you'd be playing, your home games wouldn't have the same meaning because you don't have fans in the stands. There's going to be different disadvantages because of the schedule, but at least you're playing everybody. It's a little harder to complain in that sense. If you're not playing everybody and you're not playing the same schedule that everybody else is playing, there's valid complaints because that's not how the competition was structured. So, I don't know. There's no perfect way to solve it. If you go the Dutch system and don't promote relegate anybody, if you go the French system and just say the table is what the table is, England, you've got a different number of games for different teams. You've got teams that advanced in cup play that had games that were postponed to later in the season, and they're going to get punished basically for making a cup run because they're going to play fewer games. That's not acceptable. But I don't know how you can make any of this acceptable. And this is something that the leagues are going to have to work with their teams, because if you do not communicate properly, you will have the SPFL on your hands. You will have that type of situation on your hands. You have to find a way to work together during this time to get to a common outcome that is the best possible. It's not the right outcome, because I don't think that's going to be possible at this stage, but it is the most fair you can get to. But you've got to work together to do that, or you're going to have all the madness that goes alongside of it. And I think we're already seeing, these flashpoints are happening. It's only going to grow. When the league makes a determination that, hey, nice job, nice try, but you're not going to have the chance to get promoted, even though you had 7 games, 8 games, 10 games left, and you're 1 point back. Sorry, that stinks for you. Try next year. That's not going to be acceptable to a lot of people.
Tafka says, I have to imagine that competition guidelines worldwide will, in the future, include a provision that a league stoppage requiring an end of a season before completion will decide league champs and pro rel based on XYZ.
Yeah, and they could have that now. We're not seeing them. But if they don't, they will. And they'll probably have to have some kind of clause about the government making these decisions, or if they pass things that affect the ability to play matches, then that's when it triggers this. Basically, you have to create a bylaw or a guideline that says, in the case of these situations, and you're probably going to need to have multiple possibilities. In the case of these situations, when certain triggers are hit, then the competition committee or the board can make the decision about how the season is resolved. That's what you need to have in there, because that's what it's going to come down to. And we don't know if that's the case in these leagues because we're not seeing those competition guidelines.
According to the Mirror, one of the biggest stumbling blocks for any potential restart outside of the top flight is the number of tests needed for players in order for the season to finish safely, understood to be around 66,000. As with the Premier League, there are fears about a public backlash should tens of thousands of tests become readily available for professional footballers, while a number of frontline NHS workers are still working without them.
Yeah, these are all very important questions. That's what we talked about yesterday. Getting back to action should be the goal for everybody. You want to play these games. We've talked about all the business reasons for wanting to play these games, but it has to be done safely. And the testing is a big part of being able to ensure the safety of playing these games. And if you don't have it, then you can't ensure that. And that's going to be a huge issue. The public perception is another part of it that does have to be factored in. If these leagues are taking tests away from people that the public feels like needs them more, well, that's not a good look. And that's not necessarily where you want to be. I don't know. I don't know what the solution is. There's not an easy one. It is a fact that there's just not an easy solution here. But I do think the conversation is going to be different country to country. I do think the conversation is going to be different level to level. Because, let's say there are the tests available for people to acquire for these purposes. Okay? If they're available and they can be acquired and they can be purchased and they can be handled, Premier League clubs, top flight clubs are going to be in a position to do that far more than a League 2 team would. And that's a reality. That's part of the situation. So that will factor in. And that will make this even more complicated. But I do think it will be the top flights that finish. The championship is in kind of an interesting situation. They might not. Beyond that, I don't see third and fourth divisions finishing their season in countries where the top flight does. I just don't think it's going to be financially viable.
Barcelona bracing themselves for another round of pay cuts because the pay cuts accepted by players last month will not cover, according to the Daily Mail, the huge losses anticipated as the new camp remains shut. Barca players volunteered a 70% reduction in wages at the end of March, lasting for the duration of the state of emergency called on March 14th, which is now being lifted in phases. But the measure was always only ever to be a stopgap on the way forward. Catalan paper La Vanguardia revealed recently the club have already drawn up two possible roadmaps for the next 10 months, according to how well or otherwise things develop. One scenario had the stadium reopening in November. Second scenario, now seen more likely, means that the new camp could be closed until February of 2021. So you're looking at another possible 200 million euro in loss or in projected revenue that won't be acquired by Barca. So trouble in La Liga, once again personified here by Barcelona.
I mean, it's beyond trouble, man. I mean, 70% pay cut. They have 30% left. Now, I'm going to assume that part of this is down to when pay goes back to normal, because as you said in the article, it was a 70% reduction in pay while the emergency order was in effect from the government. If that's about to be lifted, then, according to that agreement, that 70% reduction in pay would be lifted. Because if it's the other side of it, which it could be, if the 30% that they're paying out to their players right now is still too much, well, that's a pretty scary situation if you are Barcelona. And Barcelona is one of the biggest clubs in the world. Barcelona was caught in a very bad time frame for this to happen. Have they run their club in the most fiscally responsible way? No, they haven't. That's obvious if you look at this stuff. But did they foresee a global pandemic to prevent them from selling players in the summer window that could have helped to rectify some of this? Probably not when they signed these players to these contracts over the last few years. I'm going to assume that they did not. So, you're in a situation where you kept a group together for a long period of time. And this goes back to, keeping Xavi, keeping Iniesta, keeping, incredible talents together. Right now it's Messi, it's Busquets. Keeping that group together and paying them more every year to keep them together. These are the effects of it when a catastrophe happens. And that's what this is. It's a financial catastrophe for a team like Barcelona on top of everything else, because they were going to start to fix this stuff in the summer. Coutinho was a big contract on their books that they were looking to be able to sell and bring in money to help sort some of this stuff out. Well, one, you're probably not going to get that kind of money that you were thinking. And two, now you've lost the revenue in the meantime, and you're in a really bad spot. And no, I don't think they're going to have fans in the stands anytime soon. I think we are looking at 2021 in Spain for that to happen, and maybe in most places. So you're not going to have that match day revenue. At least if you can get the games played, you'll get TV revenue. And Barcelona's a club with the size to maybe find other ways to increase the revenue in light of this, but not to make up for the lack of match day revenue. That's going to be impossible.
A couple of notes out of the Premier League. And it took me to try and find a picture. I was going to ask you, how would you describe what a snood is?
It's like a neck warmer, essentially.
Okay. Every Premier League player will need to wear a mask or a snood in training, and all balls will be disinfected as part of strict new rules. Officials...
Well, they could order the soccer down here guard, is what they could order. Because,
there you go.
I mean, a snood is like for cold weather. This is not a snood. This is thin. This is microfiber. But it's the same general principle because it can be pulled up over your mouth and nose. The snood is to stay warm, but a mask like this, you could do it. So they could all wear soccer down here guards and donate guards to the kids at soccer in the streets if they need these for training.
And they can DM you, or they can DM Soccer Down Here. They can reach out to Soccer Down Here in a bunch of different ways.
Uh-huh.
Hey, Premier League.
Yep, we'll take care of you. Diehard's got your back.
Officials are planning to resume Top Flight football June 8, but only if plans for Project Restart are approved tomorrow, signed off by the government. So here's how Joe Strange phrases what's being planned. Safely return.
Who is Joe Strange, and where is he from, sir?
Daily Mail Online.
You.
Safely returning to training in groups is a major part of that, with a new 7-page document of draconian regulations reportedly set to be sent out to every club. Arsenal and Tottenham are among the clubs to have reopened training grounds for individual sessions. New rules will be put in place to ensure players can mingle without the risk of spreading coronavirus. The Mirror claims that the regulations include stars wearing a mask or a snood at all times, staff wearing PPE equipment, disinfecting balls, corner flags, and goalposts, and only 5 players training per group. Players will also need to park their cars at least 3 spaces apart. No massages will be allowed unless approved by a club doctor, and drinks must be left at particular pickup points.
This is what's hard about all this, because I would assume that these guidelines are being talked through with people who would know better, because some of them sound just completely and utterly ridiculous. Beyond normal social distancing. The parking of cars 3 spaces separate from one another? Really? That's, 20 feet? That's more than 6 feet?
More than 6 feet.
You could still park next to one another, but just stagger who gets into the car and who gets out of the car. There's some things that feel like overkill here.
Yes.
And I get it, but it confuses the situation, and it makes all of this feel even more impossible when some of these things are just borderline silly. Okay, the wearing the mask in training, again, it goes back to the fact that you should not be having group sessions in training, anything with contact, if you do not know that everybody is clear of the virus. If you have the testing, if people are cleared, then you have to function in more of a normal way. Now, that does bring up the questions, and this is a valid one. This is why some leagues have talked about the lockdown idea, that when people leave the facility, they could potentially catch the virus if they are not following their own guidelines, their team's guidelines, the national guidelines. That is a factor. That's why the testing and consistent testing is going to be very important. Beyond that, you're getting into some crazy situations where you're asking players to, wear gloves as they step out to the field and then discard them. You're asking players to wear masks while they are participating in soccer activities. You're getting into things that, if it is still to that degree of restriction, should you be doing it? And that's what I keep going back to is, I think we all want to see this. We all want to see games played. There are precautions that need to be taken, obviously, at every team's level. But sometimes if you're at this point, if you're coming up with things about telling people that they can't park anywhere near a teammate, maybe you shouldn't be playing if that's part of the concern.
Yeah.
Maybe you shouldn't even be doing it. Maybe you should still be back at the individual training phase. I don't know. But the fact that every country seems to have its own idea when the virus is the same in every country. The fact that we get all these different competing guidelines about, they're wearing gloves before they walk on the field, and they're doing this, and they're not parking cars next to one another, and can we get some consistency? And these are the areas where I'd like to hear more from FIFA about, these are best practices. These are what we ask our membership to follow. Make it consistent, because what that's going to do is then that's going to help youth clubs. That's going to help grassroots clubs who might be able to come back because they're not worried about spectators. They might be able to do things sooner, but they need guidelines on what is safe, what is acceptable, what is approved. Right now, it feels like everybody's just making it up as they go, and that's not good enough. That's just not good enough. I don't know. And I don't know what the solution is outside of just, at a minimum, these leagues that are trying to get back on the field, coming up with some kind of consistency between how they're trying to do it. Not in timing, but in procedure.
From the Daily Mail article a little further down, Premier League medics believe attempts to complete the season will not collapse if a player or staff member tests positive for coronavirus. Sportsmail understands that one positive test will not derail the season, with top-flight medical staff ready to agree to persist with trying to get the campaign finished regardless. Medics are increasingly confident training and games can continue even after people are infected. Essentially, clubs will take the view that a positive test will be treated as any other injury, with the individual being taken out of action.
And I don't have a problem with that. I feel like there has been a massive overreaction in that conversation right there. You know, the idea that if one player tests positive, then you shut the whole league down. Now, I know that's what happened in the NBA. That was a different time. That was 6 weeks ago. We didn't know as much then as we do now. I think that if everything else is being done properly, and especially the testing, and especially the quick results testing, if a player tests positive, and then he is isolated from the group while he is contagious, while he is still testing positive, then okay, I don't even want to say it because I know how this connotation goes, but it's like if somebody had the flu and they're sent home, right? Because that happens. We see that in clubs where somebody is contagious with the flu. They're sent home. They don't train. They stay away from the group. That happens. This would be treated in that way. It doesn't mean the league has to shut down. It means that you isolate them. You keep the rest of the team from being sick. If you played that team last, right before this, you're probably going to want your guys to get immediately tested, and then you work from there. I mean, that's how it's going to have to be going forward. And it's not trying to be insensitive to it. Not at all. It's trying to be realistic. I'm glad that's at least been said now, because what I've heard from most is this idea that if one player in a league tests positive, then everybody shuts down for 2 weeks. And that doesn't make a lot of sense when you start to really think about it. Because we have had players, and I know the different levels of how contagious it is. I'm completely aware of that. And the testing, again, becomes what you're leaning on here. But we've had players test positive for contagious illnesses in sports before, and it's handled. They're sent home. They're kept away from the group. These things are handled in that way. This can be handled in that way. Obviously, more care because of the level of how contagious this can be, but you have to be realistic about some of these things, and I don't think you can say that, well, until a league can guarantee that no player would at all have any possibility of catching the virus, that you can't play, then we're not playing sports, period. We're not doing anything, period. And I don't think that's realistic. So I don't know. I wish I did. I wish there was some easier way to handle this, but I'm glad that that's being said, because I think that's an important step here in saying that, if one player tests positive, it doesn't mean that everything shuts down. It means you have to immediately isolate. It means you have to test all the other players in that group, not just players, staff, everybody who's been in contact. Team that's played them most recently has to be checked as well, but as we saw with the Utah Jazz, now I know other teams have been different. There was a report that, and I believe it was actually taken back, it was rescinded, of something that Romelu Lukaku said about Inter, and I think he said something like 23 of 25 people were sick, and that was actually walked back, so I don't know what the reality was. But for the Jazz, you had a player test positive and only one other player tested positive in that follow-up testing. It's not a guarantee that because one player is sick that everybody associated with that team is sick. That's the hard things about this. We're learning every day, and I hope by the time that we get back on the field, we know even more about these things, but we can't lose sight of reality with this. And I know it's hard to, and it's very, very scary, but we have to be, I think, logical about it as best we can.
Chris Hutchison on the timeline this morning is saying that we need soccer down here in Atlanta United snoods now.
I don't think you have the facilities for that, big man.
I don't have that copyright. So, not combining them. There is an Atlanta United mask that I think Fanatics did for all the MLS teams, but it is more of the mask variety that hooks around the ears. Personally, I just didn't really like I don't like something hooking around my ears. It bugs my ears. It's uncomfortable. I feel like it's just not. It's not what I like. I liked the guard snood. I think of a snood as a cold weather thing. Maybe I'm wrong. It might not be, but I like something like that I can pull up over my mouth and nose, but I can easily pull down as well. Like I like that better. So
like an extended turtleneck version of a turtleneck if it wasn't attached to the actual sweater.
Yes, kind of. Yes, it's. You couldn't call it a turtleneck because I think technically a turtleneck is attached to the sweater. So
right.
Terminology not correct. It's
right, but if you pulled the turtleneck off the sweater, that's your snood.
Yeah, but why would you do that? That's crazy.
That's what I'm saying. That's just what it is for if you couldn't quite picture what it looks like. And I looked at the picture of Mesut Ozil wearing a snood, and I'm like, oh, it looks like a turtleneck, but it's not attached to a sweater.
It doesn't look like a turtleneck to me. It feels a lot bigger than that. I don't know what kind of turtlenecks you're used to wearing, but that feels kind of crazy as a turtleneck.
I know. KFC has tactics, which we'll save for later. League One rundown from KFC. KFC says, our pronunciations are on point. Toulouse, we're destined to lose. Sorry. For kicks, can I get a guignolp from the guys?
Is it guignolp?
That's what I always thought it was guignolp.
Okay. It could be. French is very difficult for me. I'm glad that I got the KFC seal of approval because French is one of the more difficult ones for me because it's close enough to Spanish but different that it throws me. So I try to at least get the accent as best as I can and go from there. But and French is one of the harder ones. The Eastern European ones, forget it. I really struggle with because you get all kinds of crazy letters that aren't said the way that I'm used to them being said in any language. Swedish was actually kind of tricky. And when we did the preseason game with Elfsborg, the combination of Swedes, Norwegians, Finns, and Danes on the Elfsborg team, because there's some slight differences between all of those, that was a huge challenge. Latin, I'm generally pretty good. Portuguese has got its peculiarities, as we have seen with Josetu. German, a lot of people say German is one of the easier ones. It feels really foreign to me, but I get most of the pronunciation rules. It's the Eastern European ones that are the hardest, and French, for whatever reason, is one of the hardest ones for me.
Well, having family in Norway, for me, the Scandinavian ones are easier.
That's what I'm saying. Like, Norway is not necessarily the same as Sweden or Finland or Denmark. Yeah, I mean, you've got family in Norway. That's great. But if you pronounce a Swedish name from a Norwegian perspective, you might be getting it wrong. And that's what I was finding as I was researching the Elfsborg roster was, my way is usually to try to nail it like the player's family would say. So like it said in where that player comes from. Mm-hmm. And that's what's so hard about it because there's subtle differences in Sweden, Norway, Finland, Denmark. It's all very similar, but there's these subtle differences, and I had to kind of try to get my head around that and make it work. Just like, and it's a little different because these are, correct me if I'm wrong, these are all separate languages.
Yeah,
it's not like a different dialect.
No.
Okay.
No.
Because that's a difference than our world famous Tito Villalba and Tito Villalba debate.
Yes.
Because that is a difference within a language, country to country. These are different languages, but they're very similar, and they have some slightly different rules. So it's even more complicated.
Yes. Tafka is in this morning. He says, I've got it. Like wars of old where a single champion would fight in the stead of the army. Each team provides its goalie and best player. They then perform skill-based challenges to finish the season. Never need to be less than 10 feet within another person.
Crossbar challenge remotely. That's what will determine who gets promoted, who gets relegated, who wins the championship, who goes to Europe. Let's do it. Come on. It'll be better than the horse thing that the NBA tried.
And then John Nason is excited. So CCFC to the championship then with a trophy.
They haven't decided that yet. They might say, you know what, we're not going to do it, so no championship for you.
None.
Katie, we'll have to wait and see.
Katie Weaver says, summer training with Premier League teams is going to look like Survivor with teams quarantined together and sweaty, wearing snoods and buffs.
Yeah. Look, I mean, it's just the way that I've thought about this. You're going to have some differences. You're going to have some changes to the structure that could be temporary. You might have some that become permanent. In terms of training practices, in terms of everything, in terms of our everyday life outside of a soccer team. But I think there will be ways to get back on the field, first with training and then with games. And we just need some protocols and consistency on getting there. And look, it might take more time. It might take another month. It might take another 2 months. I don't know. I don't think anybody necessarily does, but I hope that in creating these things, there is thought being put into it rather than crazy things like you have to park 3 cars away from one another, because that just makes no sense. And when you hear that, maybe this is just how my brain works. So I hear this set of rules, right? And then I get to that one, and I'm like, that's stupid.
Yep.
Like, that doesn't even make sense. So why am I taking the rest of these rules seriously? Like when that's thrown in there, it's like, what are you doing? So
overthinking.
I guess it's just ridiculous. So I do hope that as these things are being put together, there is thought being put into it, and also, experts being put into this in terms of creating these best practices, and you can start to get a little consistency in it. Because if you're going to have to park 3 cars away from everybody, I don't know if you necessarily know what you're dealing with.
Last note out of the Premier League before our SPFL update. Apparently, Manchester United players have been told that they will be responsible for washing their own uniforms.
Oh, no. Oh, God. I'm sure that they have no idea how to wash their own clothes.
I'm just waiting for the first guy to mess it up and put it in with unlike colors, and it comes out like faded or pink or something like that, and they have to wear it.
I think they will probably have other shirts, John. I'm going to assume that Manchester United has a whole warehouse of shirts.
Can't a man dream?
No, because that's, again, ridiculous. It makes no sense. They would just issue that person a new shirt. That's all. Yeah, that's not that big of a deal. I think people trying to make that into a bigger deal is a little ridiculous. People
all right.
can handle washing their own stuff.
SPFL update.
In Scotland, today,
Neil Doncaster, SPFL chief executive, was interviewed by the Daily Record chief sports writer Keith Jackson. And he was asked a couple of questions, and Jason, they look similar to ones that you've been asking this entire time.
Oh, really? So now, wait a minute. Let's make sure we're getting all this right. They are being asked by who to who?
By chief sports writer at Record Sport, Keith Jackson, to the chief executive of the SPFL, Neil Doncaster, about the current state of affairs.
All right.
Question 1. The general consensus is that you're guilty either of incompetence or corruption. Which one is it?
Yeah, I mean, that's a valid complaint.
Neil Doncaster's answer. Clearly what happened with the Dundee vote was unfortunate. First getting caught in the quarantine system, and then the quarantine system. It's not a spam filter, it's a quarantine system.
Well, that could be different terminology again. That's okay.
And then Dundee having a change of heart and submitting a second return.
Sure, they just had a change of heart. Yeah, okay.
but I don't think those circumstances were of our making at every stage.
What? They were not of your making, Neil. It's your quarantine system, first off, if that's what you want to call it. And two, you announced the voting results and did not say that they were final. You just said, yeah, this is what we have. These are our pending votes. And, oh, yeah, there's one who hasn't voted. And then you accepted a change of their vote even after you had recovered the original vote. But none of this was of your making, huh? Okay.
At every stage, we've tried to respond to each issue as it has emerged and to do so with the best interest of all 42 clubs at heart. That we have the support of 81% of those clubs indicates we've done exactly that. It's telling that in the 3 weeks since that resolution was sent out to clubs, no one has come up with a viable alternative.
Hey, Neil, I got a viable alternative. First off, you actually don't announce voting results in progress because that's not really how any vote is done anywhere in the world. When people's votes can actually change the outcome and you tell them that, especially in something like this. So that's one thing that you maybe could have done differently. Maybe you could have changed. By allowing that vote to be changed, the proposal passed. So if you're going down that road, that's like saying that, well, this team lost the game, but they haven't shown in the 3 weeks afterwards what they would have done differently. They lost the freaking game. The proposal passed, Neil. Like your vote, your proposal that you put on the table that you wanted to pass, you allowed a vote to change so that it would pass. And are you complaining now that people haven't come up with a viable alternative? The alternative to the voting process was you would actually take the vote that was delivered, because that's how voting works, Neil. I don't know if you're familiar with that. And the alternative to a proposal that has already passed is, why would you even put a alternative to a proposal that's passed out? Because the proposal passed. Neil, you're not making any sense. But why am I surprised about that?
Yes. Question from Keith Jackson. Why not issue loans against end-of-season prize money?
That sounds familiar.
Answer. In theory, you could have tried to change the articles and maybe gone with equal distributions to all clubs, but that would have required the backing of 11 clubs in the Premiership plus huge majorities elsewhere, which is not realistic.
Oh, it's not realistic. Neil, let's really try to make sense of that one. So here's the proposal. We're going to give you one of two things. Either a loan against the prize money, and you would, if you want to structure it as a loan against the bottom team in the division's prize money. So you're not giving them more money than they would be getting. Mm-hmm. You're if you want to call it a loan, fine. Otherwise, you're just calling it an advance, which is what would make more sense. You're giving them the minimum amount they could make. So you're going to do that. You're going to go to the clubs and say, hey, guys, I know everybody's hurting for money right now. Here's what we're going to do. The prize money that you will get at the end of the season, when it is completed, we're going to give you an advance of that because the season hasn't been completed. So we can't give you everything. But we're going to give you an advance based off the minimum amount. You're not going to have to give us any money back. We're not asking for any money back. We're not going to put some crazy interest term on it.
We're just fronting it.
The money that you're going to get later, we're going to give it to you now. We need 11 of the 12 to vote for this. Are you with me, guys? We're going to give you money. You're not going to have to give anything back. There's no interest. We're going to give you money up front instead of making you wait. Who's against this? Really?
Uh-huh. Really?
Hello?
Pee-wee gets it.
Seth and Amy. Really? Question from Keith Jackson. Aberdeen's Dave Cormack revealed in a radio interview that you called him shortly before the 5 p.m. voting deadline. Did his comments expose you and imply coercion?
Why was Neil doing that? That's... Whoa, okay.
Answer, not at all. I had conversations with a huge number of chairmen and chief executives answering their questions. Those discussions are absolutely commonplace. It's telling that 8 out of 9 directors on the board of the SPFL still believe it was the right approach.
Well, Neil, let me ask you this since you talked to everybody. Did you talk to Dundee FC and say, hey, bro, where's your vote? And then they would have said, bro, we sent it in. Well, I don't see it. Well, maybe check your quarantine filter, Neil. Oh, okay. Cool, thanks, guys. Click. Here's the voting results. It did not pass. Like, if you're talking to everybody, you didn't think to ask where the vote was? Oh, jeez.
Follow-up. So there was nothing inappropriate about telling Aberdeen their vote was no longer required. Answer.
Also true. Whoa.
That's not quite the context of the discussion. Aberdeen were looking for a commitment that we could not give. They wanted some sort of vote with all Premiership clubs before a line could be drawn under season 1920. Prior to our 5 p.m. board meeting, out of courtesy, I called Aberdeen back and said, we've already got the threshold required in the Premiership. It was not a question of saying your vote is no longer required. I was phoning to ask if they still wanted me to take their original request to the board. At that point, they said they didn't. It's not as quite as has been portrayed.
Okay, I'll give Neil a little bit of a benefit of the doubt there, but that's still probably not really what you should be doing during a vote. Even though it didn't change anything, because he's right, like, this voting was tiered, and that needs to be understood. Like, you had to have a certain percentage of each flight in the Scottish League. And if the Premier League, or the Premiership, was already at that threshold, then no, it didn't matter if there was an alternative proposal or whatever, because it had already been approved to that level. The Dundee vote would have affected the next tier and its threshold. So they are separate things, and it doesn't look good, but Neil at least gets the benefit of the doubt on that one. Score 1 for Neil.
Question. Surely you accept it was an error of judgment to announce the results of the ballot before all votes were in.
Oh, please tell me he tries to fight this one.
Answer. Our PR team were fielding numerous calls just after 5 o'clock from journalists desperate for an update. If we hadn't published those numbers, we would have been accused of unwarranted secrecy. We were trying to be open and transparent. If we had said nothing until all votes were in or until the 28 days had expired, that would have been completely untenable.
Okay. Okay, I'm just going to try to make sense of this one. So, because you had a bunch of media members who were saying, hey, deadline for the vote was 5 o'clock. Where's the results, buddy? Okay, that's probably what they should be doing, because it's kind of a big deal. Nothing wrong with that. And because you're like, oh my gosh, they just keep calling. There's so many people calling and they want answers and we don't have answers. What do? Instead of, since you called everybody, and you were talking to people all throughout the day, instead of calling your office, I'm gonna give you what should have happened, and this is how I would have done it. All right, if I am Neil here, I would have said, all right, what's at 5 o'clock? I would have said, all right, office, what are the results here of the vote? Break it down for me. And they do, and they say, well, because he knew, because he talked to Cormac at Aberdeen, he knew that the Premiership side of it was already handled. So he knew what the results were at this point. Along the way, he knew what votes had already been turned in, correct? Am I incorrect in assuming that?
Short of the one vote, I thought that all...
No.
What?
We're going to go step by step here, because this needs to be broken down very clearly, because obviously Neil needs a little help. All right. He told the reporter who asked that Neil told Dave Cormac of Aberdeen that it doesn't matter what you vote. We've
Right.
already hit the number with the premiership.
Yes.
So he was following the voting throughout the day. This was before the deadline, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay. It's
Going
making
by
sure
that,
I am
going by
assuming
that,
things correctly.
going by that previous quote, I'm
Yeah,
following
what
the
he
train.
just said in this
Yes.
this interview.
Mhm.
Okay. So he's been following it. 5 o'clock, deadline hits. He would know what the votes were. If I am Neil, I would say, hey, give me a final tally. Where are we? All right, I know the premiership's good. Where is everything else? And I would have totals, and I would see that, well, wait a minute, I'm missing a vote. And he's talked about how he was talking to everybody throughout the day. Before you're answering the reporters' questions, my assumption would be your first call, which would have happened prior to 5 o'clock, I would have assumed, but definitely would have happened at 5 o'clock, is, hey, Dundee, where's your vote? Then you would have avoided all of this. Let's say that for whatever reason, Dundee was not answering their phone. Now, they said they did that after they realized that their vote was not counted, and then they realized their vote was very powerful and all that. But let's say that they didn't answer the phone call from our good friend Neil. Okay? Then what do you tell the reporters? Because if you get the answer and they say, well, we voted and we sent it at this time, and there it is, and you start to figure out, you would kind of assume that it's in the spam filter. Or you would say, hey, well, I know you sent it. What is your freaking vote, pal?
Or where is your vote? I don't see it.
You already covered that part. Either way. So let's say you say, okay, have you voted? We don't have it. We emailed it. We followed the protocol. All right, then you're going to try to figure it out. I mean, Dundee can't answer where the vote is if they sent it. They don't know the spam filter side of things. I know technology, but let's try to make sure that we cover all the bases in this. So Neil doesn't have Dundee's vote. He calls Dundee. He says, where's your vote? They say we sent it. So then you start looking for the vote. But also, you could just say, well,
what's
buddy,
your vote?
What's your vote? And we'll confirm it without announcing what the results were. Because that's not how you vote in things. You don't know the outcomes before you vote. So, you could have done all that. You didn't. You could have done that before you talked to the media. You didn't. Let's give Neil another benefit of the doubt, and you try to call Dundee. They're not answering their phone. They've went out for fish and chips, so they're not paying any attention to you. And you've got reporters breathing down your neck, demanding answers, because that was a huge concern of Neil's in this. You could tell them that all of the votes have not been tallied, and we will have an announcement for you tomorrow. You could tell them that, according to league protocols, teams can withhold their vote. Because I don't remember the actual definition of it. I don't have it in front of me, but you had like 28 days or something. Remember that?
Yeah, there's an extra. Yeah, you can announce it either immediately or within 28 days.
Yeah, the teams could hold their vote.
Yes.
Even though you had a deadline and everybody voted at what we thought, except for one, but we found out that they had voted and they changed it. So you could have announced at this point, everyone has not voted. We do not have all of the votes. And if the media wants to go and hound every team and try to find who hasn't voted or what happened, then that's on them. You don't give them that and say, well, it's not done yet because we're still missing a vote, but here's what the results are. You chose the worst option of about 6 different ones. So don't give me we did everything right. We had to say something because these people were breathing down our neck. You could have said a lot of things. You could have handled it a lot of different ways. So it goes back to the first question. Was this corrupt? Or are you just incompetent? You could be both. You could be one or the other. But you're something because you blew this whole thing in a way that I have never imagined would have been the case. It's incredible. You have class president elections in 2nd grade that are handled with more integrity than this thing. They're going to have to remake the movie Election with Matthew Broderick because of this nonsense. Remake it.
Cook County politics ain't got nothing on this, brother. The Chicago machine.
Tell me that all is above board or all is handled in the best way possible. At a minimum, this was handled with a degree of incompetence that is frightening.
So I have an option here.
Okay, you have an option.
I have.
Do we have more questions from the media on this one?
Very much so.
Oh, good. Okay. But what's your option?
I can give you Keith Jackson's question about, is the SPFL guilty of a lack of contrition first? Or I can give you his Dundee question next.
Oh, this is good. Let's get the Dundee question next.
Keith Jackson, : but that started the Dundee debacle. Do you regret anything about how that soap opera unfolded?
The Dundee debacle. I love it. Okay, what does our friend Neil regret anything about it?
The fact that Dundee had a change of heart was not of our doing. They were entitled to do so. In retrospect, we should have requested the returns be made slightly later, after the Easter weekend. It's important that where things could have been handled better, we reflect on that. But in terms of any improper behavior, the Deloitte independent investigation looked through all of our emails, telephone record, and texts, and it simply found no evidence of improper behavior by me or any of my staff. That doesn't surprise me. I trust my team implicitly.
Well, Lottie frickin' da!
Neil, you missed the incompetent part of the conversation as well. Maybe Deloitte didn't find that although you said you've been talking to everybody throughout the day, maybe you just didn't talk to Dundee. Maybe you didn't talk to Dundee after the vote. You talked to everybody during the day, and you told Aberdeen that their vote wasn't necessary, but you weren't worried about Dundee's vote and the fact you didn't have a vote, and that just wasn't concerning to you. I'm a little skeptical of that. But anyway, you had Deloitte investigate everything and check it all out, and they came out and they said, there's no phone calls, there's no records, there's no nothing. I do wonder if burner phones are a thing in Scotland, but
didn't we have a relationship that was?
Well, no, that's separate. That's after the fact. That's after all this. That's
okay.
Well after this, we're talking about these days where Dundee, after the results were announced and they were incomplete, Dundee said, "Yeah, don't take our vote. If you find it didn't happen." Which is mind-blowingly ridiculous that you allowed that to be the case. But second, the question was, correct me. The question from Mr. Jackson was about the Dundee debacle. Mm-hmm. Was it, do you regret anything about it? Essentially,
do you regret anything about how that soap opera unfolded?
That's pretty broad. Neil doesn't regret anything, and he says that we weren't engaged in anything, according to Deloitte, that was bad. Well, you, at a minimum, were engaged in stupidity in how this was handled. And when you answer a question about do you regret anything, you could just say that we regret that we chose the dumbest possible option of what to do at the time, when we were so afraid that all of the reporters were hounding us for answers about this vote. We chose the worst possible way to handle that. And we regret that we did that. We won't do that again. All you got to say, and you could phrase it a whole lot better and protect yourself a little bit more. That's fine. But to say, nope,
we're good.
We did everything correct. Deloitte says so. Neil.
So is the SPFL guilty of a lack of contrition?
Well, I think that's obvious, but what did he have to say about that?
I would hope not. But the allegations that have been made are far more serious than that. They're suggesting improper behavior in a vague and generalized way without any specifics. I don't think that's an acceptable way to go about things. If anyone feels there's been improper behavior, then they should bring it to the public's attention, raise it with the chairman of the SPFL for a proper investigation. That simply hasn't happened. There have been calls for myself and SPFL legal advisor Rod McKenzie to be suspended without a shred of any alleged evidence being produced.
All right, Neil, I got some non-alleged evidence for you, and I'm not in Scotland, but here you go. At a minimum, because of your actions, or your people's actions, because of the league's actions, the SPFL as an entity, because of the decisions that you made, you tainted the integrity of the voting process. Do you want to argue that fact? If you do, you're going to lose the argument because you had a team change their vote after you didn't find their initial vote or call them to clarify, and you just made an announcement about the results as they stood. Your action to do that tainted the integrity of the voting process. That's not accusing you of anything else other than something really stupid. But what that did is that made the integrity, that put a giant question mark by the integrity of the voting process and by extension of your organization. Leave the rest of the accusations out of it, because I don't have any evidence of that right now either. But at a minimum, your actions screwed up the whole process. Your organization's actions screwed up the whole process. And if you can't understand that, and you keep saying, well, we didn't do X. I'm not asking you about X. I'm telling you about Y. You have to admit that you screwed that up. Period. Somebody changed their vote. Like, they changed their vote because of what you did. When they had already voted, and for some reason you didn't take their vote because of whatever stupid quarantine spam filters, whatever. You didn't try to get their vote, even though you were talking to everybody throughout the day. You didn't ask, hey, where's your vote? None of that happened. And you announced the incomplete voting. I mean, if it is dirty, if there's something very dirty to this, well, that's a whole lot of stupidity along the way to get to dirty. If they're able to prove that nothing else happened in this, fine. At a minimum, it was horribly handled, and at a minimum, those actions tainted the integrity of the vote. At a minimum, there's no way you can stick your head in the sand and say that none of that affected it. That's impossible. There's been this situation in federation leadership and league leadership across sports from the beginning of time. This is not a surprise that you're getting this situation. But this continued just lack of understanding of what happened makes me question the overall integrity of the organization even more. Because I think if they came out and said, look, we screwed this up. We shouldn't have answered anything. We should have tried to find out where the vote was immediately after the voting closed. We should have done X, Y, and Z, or Z in this case. They should have done all of that. And they can come out and say they should have done all of that. That would make me question that there was something else going on a whole lot less. But by doing it the way they're doing it, it makes you wonder, well, why aren't they just understanding that at a minimum they did something really stupid? It's mind-blowing. It's mind-blowing that we're still doing this. We're still talking about this.
So then Keith asks, and I've skipped some questions that I didn't really want to have a part of this discussion.
Oh,
but that's just personal questions from Keith. How do you feel? I don't want to ask. I don't care.
Okay.
Have you been threatened? Those kinds of things.
Right.
So Keith asks, are you embarrassed by Scottish football's behavior at a time of global suffering?
Okay.
Neil says it's extremely disappointing and very unseemly when people are losing their lives around the world. Absolutely, we should be working together to come up with a plan for restarting the game as soon as possible rather than this continued infighting. So he basically gave a non-answer answer.
Yeah, that's silly.
So the full interview is at the Daily Record, dailyrecord.co.uk in their football section. So, that was I saw that come across the bow, and I'm like, we're going to talk about this.
All right. Well, I don't think his expertise is in Scottish football law, but maybe our good friend in Decatur, Mr. Apolinski, could help clarify all of this.
Yes, aa-legal.com. What you can do is you can catch up with Steve a bunch of different ways. You can go to aa-legal.com, and there is a live chat that is available 24/7, 365. Get answers that way. Or you could drop him an email at Steve, S-T-E-V-E, at aa-legal.com, or give him a call at 404-377-9191. Over 30 years of experience, over $40 million in settlements for all of the suits that have come across his bow. That's personal injury, premises liability, nursing home abuse and neglect. Knowledgeable, compassionate, successful trial lawyers. 40 million in verdicts and settlements serving clients in Georgia and Alabama. Stephen Apolinski, recognized as one of the top 100 trial attorneys in Georgia, recognized as Legal Elite by Georgia Trend Magazine for being one of the most effective lawyers in Georgia. Chat is online now. If you go to aa-legal.com, you can start a chat with a representative, get some answers, and get your process moving there. If you choose to do it that way, once again, you can request a free consultation. Give them a call, 404-377-9191, Apolinski & Associates, LLC, trial lawyers. Drop Steve an email at Steve, S-T-E-V-E, at aa-legal.com.
Nicely done.
There you go. Nick Alifi has passed this along quickly before we get into tactics on Thursday. Mm-hmm. beIN Sports and Canal Plus to refuse to make, and this is from Get French Football News at GFFN on Twitter. beIN Sports and Canal Plus to refuse to make TV rights payments to the LFP following the definitive end of the 1920 season, meaning that the league will miss out on €243 million, more to follow from L'Equipe and LP.
So clubs are going to lose money by this. But again, the government is not allowing even closed-door games before September 1st. So France's decision changed because of that, because they were planning to come back.
Yep. Today is the last day for League One and League Two clubs to offer youth academy prospects whose deals are expiring a professional contract. If a youngster isn't made an offer, then they can leave for nothing. If a youngster does receive an offer but rejects, the club will get an indemnity. So that is a separate update from GFFN about activity going on in French football.
Okay.
All right. We have tactics questions.
All right.
So, tactics. Joe Johnstone. To what extent, and by Joe's own admission, he wants to challenge your brain in every possible aspect that he can when we come into tactics and things. So he says, to what extent can physicality extend tactical prowess and skill? How much of a tactical advantage can be gained by physically disrupting another team's tactics? In high school, our defensive tactics were simple. You can let the ball by or the player, never both.
I'm just at the point in the way that I think about the game, and it has evolved over the years. I'm at the point that tactics are not rigid, or they shouldn't be. I think teams that do have rigid tactics are limited because there are some opponents that play a certain way, and your best tactic to deal with that is to be physical. 100%. I mean, if you're playing Atlanta United and they are trying to control possession and get Pity Martinez, get Ezequiel Barco into 1v1 situations, what's one way to deal with it? And we've seen teams do it. Physical, hard tackling, middle of the field, not fouls in dangerous spots, but make it difficult for those two guys to get going. Against an opponent like that, sure. Against a different opponent, maybe that's not your best tactic. So, number one, I've completely come around on this idea that tactics should be rigid completely. Now something as simple as a coaching piece of advice to say, you have to get the ball or the man or stuff like that. I mean, that's a little bit less than a tactic to me. But in terms of being physically imposing, yeah, that's absolutely a correct tactic against certain opponents. And against others, well, you might run into somebody who's more physically imposing than you, and maybe that's not the right approach. So, I mean, going back to the original, the first part of it, in terms of, I guess, trying to put a priority on it, on the tactic or the physical side of it, I don't know if you necessarily can. I think it probably depends team to team, and it's not an easy thing to say, like, physicality can extend tactical prowess and skill. It's an element of it. Physicality is an element of a tactic or a philosophy. It doesn't override it. Let's take the tactical prowess out of the question and say, to what extent can physicality extend skill? I don't know if it extends it. It can disrupt it. If you're facing a team that's more skilled than you, one way to combat that is to play in a more physical way, and that's talking about one element of physicality. Or if you're playing a team that is more skilled than you, but let's say slower than you, one approach is to speed the game up and to play faster. You go back to something Maradona said about his time in Serie A and trying to find that balance his first year there of his technique and the speed of the game, and trying to find the balance, because he said if you play at your fastest way of playing, you're going to lose some on the skill side. If you play to the fastest your skill side can handle it, there are teams that can make that more difficult because they can play faster. If it's sloppier, they take away some of your skill. How much of a tactical advantage can be gained by physically disrupting another team's tactics? It depends. It depends on your team, and it depends on how good you are at it. If you're playing a team that is possession-based and you are a team, because I think pressing you can look at as you can physically disrupt a team's tactics by pressing, because you are making the game faster. You are changing the way it's played. And we've seen it with Red Bulls Atlanta United games, that the Red Bulls have found ways to be disruptive physically through their press. You can also be physically disruptive through hard challenges, through that side of physicality, because teams get frustrated. How many times have you seen an incredibly talented player lose their head because they're getting kicked all over the field all day? If the referee allows it, yeah, it can be incredibly disruptive. So I think the best teams tactically take all of those things into account, because your tactic has to be formed by your team's personality first, your team's skill level, what they do well, what they don't do well, whether you are accentuating your team's positives through your tactics or hiding your team's negatives through your tactics, because both are approaches. In a perfect world, you're doing both with the same tactic, but sometimes you've got to look at who you're playing and say, well, we normally play this way, but if we play this way against our opponent this weekend, we're going to get beat. So we've got to protect our weaknesses more this weekend and handle it that way. Like take Atlanta United, or take a possession team against a pressing team. We'll take Atlanta United in the playoffs against New York City and against the Red Bulls in 2018. The approach was, instead of being a team that wants the ball, because that's how we play, We're going to flip that on its head and say we don't want the ball. We're going to make them have to decide how to play with the ball because their tactic is based on not having the ball and being physically disruptive. So you can turn it on its head. Your tactic has to be based off of your team's personality, your team's strengths, your team's weaknesses, the opponent's strengths, the opponent's weaknesses. And sometimes physicality will be a big part of it. Sometimes it won't. Sometimes speed will be a big part of it. Sometimes it won't. Sometimes, skill or different ways to play that bring out different elements of your team's skill will be there. Some teams it's going to be more about taking that away from the opponent. So it's part of the process. I don't think it extends it or overrides it in any way. The physical side of the game is part of your tactical setup. It doesn't dominate it. It doesn't put everything else to the side. It can be something that you accentuate, or it can be something that if you're not a fast team, if you're not a strong team, you're trying to create a tactic to hide that. That's what it comes down to for me is what is the way that your team is most comfortable playing? What are your team's strengths? What are your team's weaknesses? What are the opponent's strengths? What are the opponent's weaknesses? Those are the questions that I ask if I'm creating a tactic for a given day. And if you want to get broader and just think about your tactics over the season, then it's more about your team's strengths and weaknesses and the way your team wants to play, the desire, the philosophy, the personality of your team. For a season tactic, you're not thinking individually opponent day to day. But honestly, the way the game's played these days, the best managers are thinking about it game by game, and they want a team that is tactically flexible to deal with the challenge from the opponent this week and then maybe a completely different challenge that the opponent next week can present. Your team has to be able to adapt and be able to do both and deal with both.
So that lends it into Joe's follow-up question, and this might be rapid fire, it may not. Depends on how you want to look at it.
I'll go more off the top of my head on these.
What would be the ideal tactical counters to the following? Tiki-taka.
I'm going to assume that my team is pretty flexible in dealing with this because your ideal tactical counter to any of these would be different based off your team. If your team is good at a certain thing or bad at a certain thing, it's going to affect how you deal with it. Let's say we have a pretty average team. They're pretty flexible. They're pretty durable. So a tiki-taka team that, when I hear tiki-taka, I don't know if Joe is meaning it from a negative. I think of it as more of a negative, and maybe that's been shaped by Guardiola's comments about it, because his version or his perception of tiki-taka as a term is a negative. It is as just holding the ball to hold the ball and not doing anything with it. Let's assume it's more of a team that wants the ball. So if they want the ball, the ideal from a average team, what you would do to deal with that, you could do it different ways, honestly. If I've got a team that's pretty good at most anything, I'm going to press, because I think your odds are better to disrupt the possession team through pressing than to sit back and park the bus and just get numbers behind the ball and concede the possession. Because if you're getting all those numbers behind the ball, you're not going to have the ability to break out. I think you're better off to try to force the mistake through pressure than to sit back and just hold your ground, which we've seen so many teams do against those Barcelona teams. And I felt like it worked less than a team that would get up in their face and try to be disruptive from a pressing or just an aggressive stance. Just at a minimum, not dropping off would be the way I would approach it.
Park the bus.
I mean, there's only so much you can do. If a team is absolutely committed to just parking the bus and just playing, let's say, a 5-4-1 and just putting numbers behind the ball, it's hard to break them down. I wouldn't go away from trying to break them down, because you have to try to win the game. What I would want to try to mix into it to see if I can pull them out is a couple different things. I would want to hold possession in maybe not my defensive third, but on the edge of it and in the middle third a little bit to see if I can get them restless and see if they want to start chasing and come out. You want to get them to come out and play a little bit because that'll create space in behind. If they don't take that bait, because basically you're casting your line and you're seeing if they're going to take it. If they don't take that, then the next thing I would try to pull them out, because I want to create space. If they're going to park the bus, I have no room to operate in the attacking phase, and I need room to operate in to get the best out of it. So my next approach would be to give them the ball and actually drop off a little bit, which sounds counterintuitive, but you might open them up a little bit more that way if they do that. Basically, do the flip of a pressing team, a team that wants to press you. You give them the ball so they can't press you because they have the ball. Pressing is a tactic without the ball. So you give the team that wants to park the bus, you say, here, take the ball. You play long, and you play to them where they start to have possession. And then the more that they have possession, they start to knock the ball around. And a lot of teams, your natural reaction to that is to start to come out and play, to start to open up more. Well, if they do that, then they're not parking the bus anymore. Those are the two things I would try. But if a team is committed to truly parking the bus, there's not a lot you can do, honestly. Like, you have to just keep trying to find the gaps. I guess my third option would be then to make the game go as fast as possible. If I'm a skilled team, I'm going to take my chances that way and try to just make the game get more difficult for the opponent to deal with by playing fast. And I'm going to trust that my skilled players can deal with that better than a team that is choosing to park the bus, because generally those are teams that are, lesser teams that choose that tactic.
Counterattack.
Okay, if they want to counter, what they're looking to do is to not just park the bus, but get numbers behind the ball and then look for a way out once they basically get you overextended. So you have to be careful. If they're looking to counter, you have to be careful. One very simple thing that I think you have to do against a team that wants to counter, because they're showing you elements of parking the bus, and then they're trying to break out quickly. You have to be prepared to foul quickly. You can't allow them to break. You can't allow them to get out when you're exposed. So you have to know when to foul. You also have to have elements of a quick, immediate counter press. When, Barcelona, and I know I reference Barcelona a lot. It's because I have a lot of respect for the way Pep Guardiola and his Barcelona teams really approached the game and I think thought about the game. When they would lose possession, one of the reasons why they would immediately try to press and win it back, one, they had the players there because part of their possession was to get players forward, but two, it was to break up the possibility of a counter, because generally a counter is a trained tactic. There are certain ways you try to counter, whether you're trying to counter through a specific player or in a specific way, and you want to make it difficult for a team to do that. So they regain possession, you want to immediately try to win it back. At a minimum, you're going to harry them, you're going to pressure them, you're going to force them into not being able to do their plan. And then two, if they do get past that first line, you got to foul. You got to be able to get back and not let that counter be effective.
High press.
I think the best way is to give the other team the ball. If I get to a point where I say, all right, I'm a possession team, I want to play through anybody pressing, but this is a team I can't do that through, or this is a moment where I can't do this for whatever reason, whether it's a playoff game, a cup game, the risk is too high, give them the ball. And you have to have the guts to do that, because if your game is based off having the ball and then you concede having the ball, that can be difficult. That can be difficult for a team to accept. That can be difficult for a fan base to accept. But that's the best way. Because generally, a team that is a high-pressing team is a team that is not used to having the ball. If you give somebody the ball and they're not used to having the ball, their chance of making mistakes is a whole lot higher. So you want to give them the ball. That way they can't do what they do well, which is to press because they have the ball, and they're more likely to make mistakes doing what they do because they're not used to doing it. So I'm going to give them the ball. And in a perfect world with all of these, you're going to vary it up a little bit. You know, if let's say you play a team that's a high-pressing team, they're really good. You say, well, we're better, so we can deal with that. You get through the first 15, 20 minutes, you're not dealing with it. You're getting overwhelmed by their press. Then it's time to start giving them the ball and turning a game on its head. So you want to have plan A's and B's and C's in all of these. But, yeah, the best way to deal with a press for me is to give the opponent the ball so they can't press.
And the long ball.
The long ball, and this came up when we talked about the U.S. Trinidad game in 2017, that the U.S. didn't qualify for Russia with. You knew that Trinidad and Tobago was going to play the long ball. You knew that's their style anyway, and you knew they didn't have even their top squad in this game, so that's what they're going to do. You have to have numbers to win the duels. Whether you're winning the long ball out of the air initially, okay, you're winning it, that's great. You got to recover the ball then. You got to win the second ball. So you've got to have bodies there. So if you're playing a long ball team, one, you have to know what their long ball is trying to do. Because some teams, like we talked about with a high press, you know, you're going to play long ball because you're going to concede possession. But you're not going to just like have everybody drop off and not battle for it. I mean, if you're Atlanta United and you're playing that way, Joseph is going to be up there battling for it. You know, so if it's just to give up possession, you still have to worry about that. But a lot of teams that play a long ball tactic, a direct tactic, it's trained. Like you have guys who are then following up behind that. They're looking for the second ball. They're looking for, all right, sure, you know, your center backs beat my forward and they won the header. But were they able to actually make a pass with that header to a teammate and then regain possession? Probably not, because it's a joust, it's a duel. So the ball's going to bounce off somewhere. If I'm a long ball team and I'm not a possession team and that's the way I'm going to play, I'm going to get numbers following up on the long ball looking to win the second ball. So the way you defend that is you have numbers. That's why it was, for me, an awful tactic for the U.S. men's national team in Trinidad and Tobago in 2017, knowing you're playing a team that is going to play a long ball style to only have one holding midfielder in Michael Bradley, because he was outnumbered on a regular basis against a tactic that you need numbers to deal with. And maybe John's with us, maybe he's not. But,
he is.
Okay, he's back. So that's the way that you have to deal with a long ball team in that sense. That's what they do. It's not a reaction to something you do. It's what they do. They probably have a big center forward. You need to have a center back deal with them. If that big center forward is winning everything, you need to have somebody in front of them and behind them. You want to kind of bracket them and box them in, make it difficult for them to get a clean look at it. But more importantly, you got to have numbers to win the second ball. That's a key.
Additionally, what effect would formation, though we're both not fans of formation focus, have on an ideal counter?
You can't really answer it because it depends on how they counter. You know, like if they're wanting to counter down the flanks, you've got to make sure you have wide players who are prepared to deal with it. If they try to counter through, you know, quick 1-2s through the middle, you've got to make sure you clog the middle. So it's going to depend on how the opponent wants to counter. More like teams that want to counter, I'm more focused on how you stop the counter at the beginning of it than the formation to deal with it once it's already beaten you, because then you're already broken down to a degree. I want to deal with stopping it from getting started. So I'm more about the foul or the immediate pressure to force a mistake and a giveaway as they try to counter. I think that's the better way to deal with it.
KFC's tactics question: to what extent do y'all think Atlanta United has symmetry in player roles? E.g., do wingbacks get forward and cover exactly the same or not?
Okay, do that one more time. Sorry, I want to make sure I got this right.
Okay. To what extent do y'all think Atlanta United has symmetry in player roles? As an example, do wingbacks get forward and cover exactly the same or not?
No, I don't think anybody really can, because every player has their own personality. The things I look for in those situations, so let's take Atlanta's 3-4-3 that we've seen them play mostly in 2020. You've got different personalities between Brooks Lennon, and who I think you want to see on that left side, and George Bello. But Jake Mulroney is a different player than George Bello when he plays that role, and Edgar Castillo would be a very different player than that. So the player personalities bring a lot to it. The question, and something that honestly I want to see more of, because we haven't seen enough of it to really get a true understanding yet. Do they, and this is the part that I don't know yet. I've had coaches who'd like to do it one way, do it other ways. It depends. It's usually more out of a 4-back. But are you committed to both wingbacks going at the same time, and it turning in a lot of ways into, at times, a 3-2-5 or a true 3-4-3, or in the Atlanta case, a 3-4-2-1, where it becomes a 3-2-4-1 as opposed to a 3-4-2-1, depending on where your wingbacks are. And that's formation again. That's why formations are generally overrated. But are you committed to having both sides go when the time is to go? Or, if not, does your line of 3 then become a line of 4? Let's say the ball's on the right side. Is your instruction, hey, left wing back, don't go, stay? That gives us an extra number back. That could be in reaction to the way a team counters. Or is it, damn the torpedoes, we're going? And the way you then deal if you're, by that point, front 5, your 2 wing backs, your 2 attacking midfielders, your 1 forward. If that line is beaten when you lose possession, how do you defend? Now, Atlanta's really lucky in the way their team's been built, and take that back. It's not luck. It's by design. But Frank de Boer is blessed to have center backs, honestly all of them, but Miles Robinson maybe to a lesser extent, that can push out wide. So he's not limited in how he defends these moments. The players can figure this out on their own, because Franco Escobar can slide out to the right and be a right back. We've seen it. Fernando Meza can slide over and be a left back. He's played it. I think if things get flip-flopped and moved around, Miles Robinson can move over and play wide because he's athletic enough to do it. Now, the holding midfielders, are they tactically intelligent and adaptable enough to drop into the back line if needed? Or is the plan for them to always stay in front, and the width, if the wingbacks are both forward and they're both beaten, the width has to come from the center backs drifting out? Those are the elements that we haven't seen enough to really get a sense of yet. Because some managers will say, no, both wingbacks, I don't want them to go. I want a little more security. Others will say, hey, if it's on, you go. And we're good enough in transition, 1, to prevent the team from breaking on us, and 2, if they do, then we're either going to foul in a good spot to where we can recover, or we've got players who can deal with that because they're flexible enough to deal with it.
Chris Hutchison says, I just realized I haven't heard Frank de Boer's name in over a month.
I know, it's sad, because I really was excited about what these tactics could do and all the discussions we'd have with it. And I think we will. I just think it's going to take a minute. Because I want to see now, this is why I think Atlanta's in a really good spot to deal with a lot of this. The health is obviously going to help. You're still going to be missing Joseph, but you've got a manager who's really good at problem solving, and you're going to have problems. You're going to have problems because you're going to have guys who get tired because you're going to play more games in a short period of time. You're going to have problems because I don't know if every player is going to come back and be 100% locked in from day one. So you're going to have to move the pieces around to get guys who are in form. I think Frank is a manager who is really good at solving those problems as they arise. And Atlanta will be in a better position than a team that is very rigid in the way that they play. Atlanta's flexible. It'll be 3-4-3, it'll be 4-3-3, it'll move around, it'll probably look like a 4-4-2 at times. Because depending on what you end up doing up top and what makes the most sense, you might decide to play Adam John as a number 9, as a big target forward, have a second forward play off of him. That could be Pitti, that could be Barco, that could be Hosetu, that could be Castro, playing in that hole with a forward. And that might be your best way to deal with some opponents. That might be the best way you play for a while. Think back to last year. They played in the 4-3-3 for a while and had a lot of success. When it kind of hit a wall, when you had pieces move around, when you had absences, you went to a 3-5-2 and it worked really well. But in your 3-5-2, you were also able to show what we now see in this 3-4-2-1, 3-4-3 look that was different than a traditional 3-5-2, and opponents had to respect it, and it was very difficult to prepare for Atlanta with. I think that difficulty to prepare for what Atlanta's going to do is ramped up even more this year because of the circumstances, but also because of the players Atlanta's brought in.
My question on a Tactics Thursday is probably more logistics and history-based.
Okay.
When did we drift from talking about players as sweeper, stopper, center, forward to just using numbers?
Well, no, we've always used numbers. Like, numbers have been in the game, honestly, in England and in a lot of countries, a lot longer than position names have been. In the United States, I think that conversation is probably more in the last 20 years or so. Because, as a kid and even through playing in high school in the mid-90s, it was sweeper stopper. Like, we didn't talk about a number 6. We didn't talk about a number 9. We didn't talk about any of that. I think it's probably in the last 20 years and probably more than anything in the last 10 or so that the coaching conversation in the U.S. is geared more around the numbers because you're not seeing teams play the same way all the time. It's not all 4-4-2. You're seeing more 4-3-3, more 3-5-2, more 3-4-3. So you're talking about a role in a variety of ways as opposed to a sweeper stopper, which is pretty rigid and playing a certain way. So I think it's been the last 20 years. And, it's something you do have to consider. We talk about it in the way that the U.S. Soccer Federation coaching manuals and courses talk about it. We don't call the defensive midfielder a 5, for example. In Argentina, they do. We don't. We call it a 6. I think sometimes people maybe try to go a little too far with it. Luckily, here that doesn't really happen. But a 7, an 11, a 3, like these kinds of things are a little broader and a little more difficult to nail down. Here, that's why I generally talk in the sense of a 6, an 8, and a 10 to differentiate between the different ways that a central midfielder can play. A 6 more defensive, an 8 is more box to box. They have attacking and defensive functions. A number 10, very limited defensive function. It's more about a playmaker. A 9 is a forward. That's honestly about it. Center backs you can have 2, you can have 3. Right backs or right wing backs, it's more about calling them by that because that's going to affect more of how a team is structured in terms of shape, and that's important to know, at least from an initial basis. Left wing, people sometimes want to clarify a little too much between a left wing and a left midfielder. It's kind of the same thing. I think you're getting into semantics a little too much if you're trying to clarify that. I'd call it a winger if they're in a 4-4-2, a flat 4-4-2, or if they're playing in a 4-3-3. Their role's different,
and you have to talk about that. But I think getting down to left wing and left midfielder is a little too much. You can even maybe drive yourself a little crazy if you get down to left center back and right center back if you're playing 3 or if you're playing 2. It's generally not too rigid, although players are better on one side or the other based off, their strong foot or their weak foot. And if they have a decidedly weaker foot, then that conversation comes up. But I only talk about numbers in certain roles, and it's more about differentiating between central midfielders or, up front, a forward, a number 9. Usually when I talk about a number 9, it's because there's only one of them. There's only one forward there, because that's what more teams are doing these days. Beyond that, I don't get too detailed on the numbers.
Kefsi's response, Kefsi would agree that a lot comes down to individuals, that you don't necessarily want to push forward both sides simultaneously. So the biggest differences I'm interested to see is the Barco versus Pitti and Remedi, Heinemann, Lorenowitz roles, and what Castro and Hosechu do in the future.
Yeah, it's going to be fascinating. You can push both sides forward if you're able to defend it, and I think Atlanta has the ability to defend it with any of those permutations. So you don't have to have somebody hold back. Let's say Edgar Castillo. He's going to be more naturally comfortable holding back more. Jake Mulroney, George Bello want to go. That's the way they play. So you've got a very different personality between your players on the left. On the right, Brooks Lennon can do both, but I think he's best going. He wants to go forward and impact the game there, and you've got to play to that. The midfield will look different depending on if it's Lorenowitz, if it's Heinemann, if it's Remedi, if it's Hosetu, because he'll factor into that as well. As your central midfielders, the 2 central midfielders. Jeff would be very comfortable dropping into the back line and making it a line of 4 when needed. Remedi, Heinemann, Hosetu, probably not. They're going to stay in front there. And if you have 2 guys who want to stay in front more, your width has to come more from your center backs drifting out wide, and then you're going to have to figure out between Meza and Robinson and Escobar which 2 stay centrally and who drops to help them and how they drop to help them. Do they stay in front but they just get a little more connected? These are the little things that can break down in a game. You've got to have that understanding within the group and how you're going to deal with it. The attacking group, I mean, the wide players, I think a lot of times people have tried to look at how Atlanta played in the 4-2-3-1 and translate that to the 3-4-3. It's so different. I don't see Ezequiel Barco, I don't see Pity Martinez as wide players in a 3-4-3. They're not. Because the way Atlanta plays the 3-4-3, the way it's had its best success, the way it's played it in 2020, those wide players in the 3 up front, they're not really wide. They're tucked in to play behind your striker. Now, that's partially because of Joseph. That's partially because of the characteristics of Barco and Pitti. Is that different with Joseph not in the equation? It could be. It very well could be, and we'll have to see that over time. But they're not playing wide. They're not naturally wide players. They can play wide in a 4-2-3-1 or a 4-3-3. They can drift wide, but wide players in the 3-4-3 have to come back and defend. They have to be comfortable functioning as a defender. Barco and Pitti are not that. And if you put them in that role, you're asking them to do something they're not strong at. You're taking strengths away from them, and you're exposing weaknesses. That's why we're talking about Bello, Castillo, Mulroney, Lennon in those roles. Maybe Castro in that role. Potentially. We'll have to see it, because he's been more of an attacking player throughout his career. I don't look at Barco and Pitti there. I look at Barco and Pitti as the 2 guys behind the striker. Or, in Pitti's case especially, but I think Barco could do it too, as a false 9, as the striker, but who's going to drop deeper. Hosetu could play in the holding midfield, in the 2 central midfielders, or he could play in the 2 attacking midfielders, in that box. He could play both. And where you use him and how you use him can really affect the personality of the group. So all these elements factor into a tactic. All these elements factor into a game plan, and all these elements factor into a team's personality. And it's going to shift with every personnel change. You could be very defensive in a 3-4-3 with this setup. If you have Castillo on the left, if you have Jeff in the holding midfield, you can be very defensive. You could also be very attack-minded with Bello or Mulroney on the left, with Josetu playing paired up with Hindman or Remedi or even Lorenowitz in the more holding midfield role, and then the two attacking midfielders and a striker. You can be very attacking, very defensive in the exact same shape, in the exact same layout, based off the characteristics of the players that you have on the field.
A couple of other points quickly before we go. From KFC, KFC really didn't mean to leave Mo out of this. Fernando and Adams could play in the center, but they have played wide and or back, and Frank had shown a reluctance to play an outside player he doesn't trust to get back and cover, at least in the playoffs.
Yeah, Luis Fernando can play as a wingback. It's not a place that he's played a ton. We talked about that with Glassy on our watch-along. You started to see him play that because Frank wanted to see him play it, because you want to see his characteristics and how he responds to things in that. We can see that from time to time, but he's definitely a more attack-minded option. We haven't seen Mo out wide much at all. We've seen it just a little bit, and it's a definite more defensively minded role for him, because he's not going to go forward like Bello or Mulroney or Lennon in that role. He's much better centrally, and I think that's more of where we see him. Could you see a time where Mo goes out wide? And I mean, let's say you're in a 3-4-3 and you've got the other pieces the way you want, and you see Mo on the right and Castillo on the left. Well, that's probably going to play more like a 5, like a line of 5 defensively because of their personalities. That's fine. You're going to see times where it's Luis Fernando out wide and Lennon out wide, for example. That's going to be much more attack-minded. So, again, same shape, but different personalities of it based off the personnel.
We're officially caught up, sir, on a Tactics and SPFL Thursday.
Jeez.
So, what's in the queue? What do folks need to know before we go?
All right. So, the guards, face masks, you can order them. They're $20 a piece. That's including shipping. You will get one, and one will be donated on your behalf to a child or family member with Soccer in the Streets who is not able to get their own masks. And we know how important these are these days. When I go to grocery store, when I go anywhere where I'm not in control of my surroundings, I wear one. I do. I think you're going to see this for a while, and I think it's going to be something that's very important in how we deal with this. So, these things also, when we're past this, you can wear it as a headband. You can wear it on top of your head. You can do different things with it. So, good quality from our friends at Die Hard. They're $20. Send us a message in whatever way you communicate with us. On Gmail, soccerdownhere@gmail.com. On Twitter @soccerdownhere. On Facebook. If you're on Instagram, you can send us a message there too. We will get things taken care of for you and get the pre-orders in. We're doing pre-orders right now. We hope to make an order of them next week if we get enough pre-orders in quickly. That's number one. Number two, stoppage time delayed from yesterday. It'll be today. It'll be 4 o'clock. It'll be a different time than usual. So facebook.com/929thegame. Myself, Mike Conti, talking soccer, talking probably a little bit of the Falcons draft, which I was happy with. Talking probably a little bit of Last Dance because it's amazing, and I want to see all of it right now and not have to wait every Sunday. But it kind of feels old school that we're waiting on Sunday for the new show. We'll talk about anything you guys want to talk about. 4 o'clock, facebook.com/929thegame. And then 7 o'clock, we will have our watch-along United States, Trinidad and Tobago, November 1989, World Cup spot on the line, the ESPN broadcast. We'll talk about everything that was leading up to the game, the importance of it, fun history discussion, and fun watch-along tonight. 7 o'clock, twitch.tv/soccer down here. So, all the things from the day, all the things later today, busy SDH day.
What you said. So
Yes.
I'm looking forward to the watch along at 7 o'clock. That'll be a hoot.
Yeah, it's going to be fun. All right,